Jacob's journey back to his homeland had been long and fraught with uncertainty. After many years in the land of Haran, where he had worked for his uncle Laban and married his daughters Leah and Rachel, he was now returning to the land of Canaan. But the road ahead was filled with anxiety and fear. Jacob knew that his return would bring him face to face with his brother Esau, whom he had wronged years earlier. He had stolen Esau's birthright and blessing, leading to a bitter estrangement between the two. When Jacob fled to Haran, he had done so to escape Esau's anger, and now, as he neared his homeland, the possibility of reconciliation seemed both distant and fraught with danger. Esau's anger had not been forgotten, and Jacob was uncertain of what awaited him. Would his brother welcome him with open arms, or would their reunion be one of confrontation? With this dread in his heart, Jacob decided to send messengers ahead to Esau to try and gauge his brother's disposition. The news he received back did nothing to ease his worries. Esau was coming to meet him, and with him were 400 men. Jacob's heart sank. The prospect of a peaceful reunion seemed even more unlikely now. Fear and anxiety gripped him, and he began to prepare for the worst. In his distress, Jacob split his camp into two groups, hoping that if Esau attacked one group, the other might escape. He sent lavish gifts ahead to Esau, including large numbers of livestock, goats, sheep, camels, cattle, and donkeys, in the hope that the gifts would appease his brother's wrath. Jacob himself remained behind, alone, with his thoughts and fears. It was in this time of solitude, under the cover of night, that an unexpected and mysterious encounter occurred. Jacob had sent his family and possessions across the Jabbok River, and as he remained on the far side, he was alone. The darkness of the night settled around him, and in the quiet stillness, he might have reflected on the years of his life. The deceitful actions that had brought him to this point, his strained relationship with Esau, and the promises God had made to him, assuring him that his descendants would become a great nation. But at that moment, in his fear and uncertainty, Jacob's mind was filled with the weight of the unknown. It was then that he encountered a man. The figure appeared seemingly out of nowhere, and without warning, the man began to wrestle with him. The struggle was sudden and violent. It was not a casual encounter but an intense and determined contest. Jacob, ever the fighter, responded in kind, matching the man's strength and determination with his own. The two grappled with each other fiercely through the night, neither one able to gain the upper hand. The man was powerful, yet Jacob was no weakling. He had spent his life fighting, scheming, and striving for what he wanted, and now he found himself locked in a battle with this mysterious figure, unwilling to let go. Time passed, and the battle raged on. The two wrestled, neither one relenting, each trying to assert dominance. Jacob could feel the strength of his opponent, but he was not about to give in. He fought on, his determination growing as the minutes stretched into hours. The dark night seemed endless, as if the struggle itself was a test that went beyond the physical. It was as though the battle was not just against this man but against something deeper, against fear, doubt, and uncertainty. At some point in the struggle, the man reached out and touched Jacob's hip, and in an instant, Jacob's hip was dislocated. The pain was sharp and immediate, but even then, Jacob did not release his grip on the man. His strength was beginning to wane, but his resolve was unwavering. The pain in his hip was unbearable, yet still, Jacob held on. He knew that something significant was taking place, and he refused to let go without receiving something in return. In that moment of intense pain and exhaustion, Jacob cried out, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." His words were desperate, filled with a sense of need that transcended the physical struggle. He wanted more than just relief from his pain. He wanted something deeper. He wanted a blessing, a sign of God's favor, a confirmation that his life, full of struggles and challenges, had meaning and purpose. The man, who had not spoken much during the struggle, now asked Jacob a question. "What is your name?" he inquired. Jacob, still grasping the figure before him, replied simply, "Jacob." The answer was direct, but it was also revealing. Jacob's name carried with it the weight of his past. His life had been marked by deception and struggle. His name meant supplanter, or deceiver, a reminder of the way he had taken what was not his brother's birthright, his father's blessing. It was a name that carried the scars of his past actions. The man then spoke again, but his words were profound. "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel," he declared, "because you have struggled with God and with men and have prevailed." With those words, Jacob's identity was transformed. The name Israel would become synonymous with the people of God, the nation that would descend from him and carry the promises that God had made to Abraham, Isaac, and now to Jacob. It was a name that signified not just survival, but victory, a victory not through physical strength alone, but through perseverance, through faith, and through the struggle itself. Jacob, though still grappling with the man, now realized the significance of the encounter. He had wrestled not just with an ordinary man, but with God himself. His physical pain was real, but the spiritual transformation was even more profound. Jacob had been changed in the midst of his struggle, and he now understood that he had seen God face to face and had lived to tell the tale. But even after the blessing, Jacob still sought something more. He asked the man to reveal his name, but the response was cryptic. The man simply said, "Why do you ask my name?" And with that, he blessed Jacob. There was a sense of mystery surrounding this figure. Jacob knew that he had encountered something beyond the ordinary, but the fullness of what had transpired was still unfolding in his heart. As the man disappeared from Jacob's sight, Jacob was left to reflect on what had just occurred. He knew that he had not only received a new name but had been marked by this encounter in a way that would forever change him. The place where the struggle had taken place became a sacred site for Jacob. He named it Peniel, which means, face of God, for he believed that he had seen God face to face and yet his life had been spared. With the rising sun, Jacob limped away from the site, his body marked by the injury to his hip. The limp would serve as a lasting reminder of the encounter that had reshaped his life. It was a visible sign of the struggle he had endured and the blessing he had received. As Jacob continued on his journey, he would carry the weight of that night with him, knowing that it had been a turning point not just in his personal story but in the larger story of the people of Israel. As he continued toward his reunion with Esau, Jacob was forever changed. The fears that had once consumed him, of Esau's anger, of the uncertain future, remained, but now they were tempered with the knowledge that he had wrestled with God and prevailed. Jacob's encounter that night had revealed to him the deeper truth that God's purposes, though often shrouded in mystery, were at work in his life. God had not abandoned him, he had met him in the midst of his struggle and had blessed him. And as Jacob limped forward, he knew that whatever lay ahead, he would face it not as the deceiver he had once been, but as Israel, the one who had struggled with God and with men and had prevailed. The journey that began that night, with the mysterious man at the Jabbok River, would continue to unfold as Jacob made his way toward Esau. The path ahead was uncertain, but Jacob no longer faced it alone. As Jacob limped away from the place where he had wrestled with God, the weight of his encounter lingered. The pain in his hip was excruciating, a constant reminder of the battle he had just endured. Yet, there was a new sense of purpose in his heart, a profound peace that began to settle over him despite his physical discomfort. The sun was rising, casting its light over the land, and Jacob knew that his life had been changed forever. The man who had blessed him, who had renamed him Israel, had given him a new identity, one that marked him as not only a survivor but a man who had struggled and prevailed. Jacob's thoughts turned once again to his brother Esau. He had been preparing for the worst, the possibility that Esau would still harbor hatred toward him, that the gifts he had sent ahead would do little to soften his brother's anger. But now, in the aftermath of his encounter with God, Jacob felt a shift in his perspective. He had been changed spiritually, and that change gave him a new courage, one born not of his own strength but of the blessing he had received. With renewed determination, Jacob gathered his family and servants and crossed the Jabbok River to rejoin the rest of his camp. He placed his wives, Leah and Rachel, and their children at the front of the group, hoping to shield them if Esau had indeed come to confront him with violence. Behind them were his herds and flocks, the lavish gifts he had sent ahead, and his servants, who had likely been up all night preparing for their journey. Jacob, now Israel, led the way, but his heart still trembled with the unknown. What would Esau say? How would he react to the man who had once stolen his birthright and blessing? Would the past be forgiven, or would it haunt him, consuming him with its anger? As they neared the place where Esau was supposed to meet them, Jacob's fear intensified once more. He sent ahead messengers to Esau with one last message, trying to show humility and remorse, asking for mercy. The messengers returned with news that struck him to his core. Esau was coming to meet him, but this time, there was no army of 400 men. Instead, Esau came with a small company of men, and as he approached, Jacob saw something that filled his heart with a strange mixture of fear and hope. Esau was running toward him. When Esau reached Jacob, he did something completely unexpected. Instead of confronting Jacob with anger, he fell upon his brother's neck and embraced him, weeping. Esau's tears were not of bitterness or hatred, but of joy and reconciliation. Jacob, overwhelmed by this gesture, wept as well. The two brothers stood there, embracing one another, as if the years of separation, the deceit, and the betrayal had never existed. It was a moment of pure grace. Esau pulled back from the embrace and looked at his brother. He asked, "Who are these with you?" Jacob introduced him to his family, his wives, his children, and the servants who accompanied them. Esau, seeing the gifts Jacob had sent ahead, asked why he had done such a thing. Jacob, humbled by his brother's kindness, explained that the gifts were meant as a way to find favor in Esau's eyes, to show that he did not come as an enemy, but as a brother seeking peace. Esau, in his generosity, told Jacob that he had no need for the gifts. "I have enough," he said. But Jacob insisted, saying, "Please accept the present that was brought to you, for God has dealt graciously with me, and I have enough." Esau, seeing the sincerity in Jacob's words, accepted the gifts. Jacob, overwhelmed by the unexpected kindness of his brother, could hardly believe what was happening. The years of fear, of trying to protect himself from Esau's wrath, melted away in that moment of reconciliation. The brothers, who had once been estranged by deceit, now stood side by side, as equals, no longer separated by the gulf of anger and mistrust. As the meeting between the brothers continued, Esau offered to travel with Jacob and his family, but Jacob, still mindful of his children and the slow pace they would need to maintain, declined. He promised to follow Esau, but at a pace that would accommodate his family's needs. Esau, with a final blessing, departed, returning to his own land. Jacob, now Israel, continued on his journey. He had faced his greatest fear and had been met not with vengeance, but with grace. The struggle that had begun that night at the Jabbok River had led to a profound transformation, not just in his body but in his heart. He had wrestled with God and with man and had prevailed, and in that struggle, he had found peace, reconciliation, and a new sense of identity. As Jacob and his family journeyed on, they came to the city of Shechem, where Jacob purchased land and set up an altar to God, calling it El Elohe Israel, which means, God, the God of Israel. Here, Jacob's family would settle, and the story of Israel would continue to unfold, a story that would be marked by faith, struggle, and the enduring promises of God. In the years that followed, Jacob's descendants grew, and the nation of Israel began to take shape. The legacy of Jacob's struggle that night, the moment when he wrestled with God and was renamed Israel, would become a defining moment for the entire nation. Israel, as a people, would carry with them the lessons of that encounter. That struggle and perseverance were part of their identity, that God's blessing could come in the most unexpected ways, and that peace and reconciliation were always possible, even after years of division and pain. And so, Jacob, the man who had once deceived and struggled for his own gain, became Israel, the man who had struggled with God and with man and had been transformed. The story of his life, marked by both human frailty and divine grace, would echo throughout the generations, reminding the people of Israel, and all who would hear their story, that in the end, the struggle is not in vain, for God is with those who wrestle, who endure, and who seek his blessing. We have gotten to the end of this video. Kindly like, subscribe or else you won't see me again.